Great. I think that's our sign. That's our cue to start. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, distinguished and undistinguished guests. I hope everyone slept well. Everyone's feeling fresh. See any bags under the eyes? No? Good. Right, welcome to this European Humanitarian Forum event, boosting the localization agenda towards inclusive humanitarian action. My name is Ikenna Azuike, and it's my pleasure to be your host for the next hour and a half or so. But you'll be pleased to hear I'm not your only host. I have a co-host, and he is the Deputy Director General at ECHO, Michael Köhler. Michael, welcome. Oh, lovely wave. I didn't wave. I should have waved.
Morning.
Michael, obviously our audience is already very well versed in the field of humanitarian action, both local and international. So what do you really hope this session is going to achieve?
Well, I hope first that you got a very good, strong coffee, because we want you to be awake. And we should discuss in a way that keeps you awake. Why? Because for me, this is not just any panel discussion. This is a consultation. You all know about localization. You all know about the grand bargain. You all know that all the donors and also many of the implementing organizations have a little bit of a bad conscience when they speak about localization, because it's probably one of the grand bargain commitments that we have made the smallest progress on. We have made progress, yes, but in comparison to other commitments, like, for example, multi-annual financing, quality financing, progress is limited. Why is it limited? Because there are legal impediments, because there are vested interests, because there's a tradition. But it cannot stay that way. I think if our business model in humanitarian aid doesn't change, if we don't go more local, if we don't invest more in local capacity building, in preventive and adaptive action, and that means going local, then we are going to be doomed to fail. We have to change. And therefore, we need you. So what I think we are here is, we are in a brainstorming. We are in a consultation session. Why? Because the European Union, that is definitely one of the sinners in terms of, let's say, insufficient localization so far. The European Union wants to improve. We want to put out guidance to our partners, to our implementation partners, on how to go local. And we want to make localization one of the criteria for awarding funding in the way. This guidance document will come out soon, but we want to benefit from your collective input here. We want to hear from you. Therefore, we need to be interactive. We want to have good examples. And we want to have, let's say, something which we can transform into concrete action.
Yeah, I just wanted to immediately jump on what you said. We want to hear from you. It's super important. Please use Slido. Send in your contributions. I understand there might be a Wi-Fi issue, but hopefully you can overcome that yourself. Just will it to go through. And let's hear from all of you, because we need a solutions-focused approach. We need concrete examples of best practices. Let's achieve the brainstorm session that Michael so eloquently sketched out that we need in this session. Okay? Okay, we know your time is precious, so let's get started. And we'd like to kick off this session with a little reminder of how humanitarians on the ground, where it really matters, look at localization. Let's run that video.
Very important to work with all local organizations in Gaza. We cannot work alone with them. So this is the most important issue of coordination and organization with them, to follow all our activities to be implemented properly.
Es necesario que la acción humanitaria internacional contribuya a través de los principios y normas internacionales a reforzar la acción local. es que complemente las capacidades de las organizaciones aquí localmente en Venezuela, ajustadas a las necesidades de atención de la población.
It's vital that we work with local organizations because they are the eyes and the ears on the ground.
Il est clair que pour beaucoup de gens, l'aide humanitaire, ce sont des organisations internationales qui se déploient très rapidement sur le terrain. Mais depuis de nombreuses années, les acteurs locaux sont en fait au centre aussi de la réponse.
Yeah, that is it in a nutshell, right? Local organizations are the eyes and ears on the ground, and it's vital to work with them. We all agree on that, but the question is, how do we work with them? How do we amplify the impact that they have, often as first responders? Before our panel discussion, which addresses some of the key issues on the localization debate, such as sustainable capacity building and the involvement of marginalized actors, we have two speakers with valuable insights on the all-important topics of funding, the longer-term agenda, and equal partnerships. The first speaker represents an organization which, for many, even epitomizes the way that partnerships can be created between international and local NGOs. They're very active on localization in the context of the Grand Bargain. It is the Undersecretary General of the National Society and Development and Operations Coordination of IFRC, Mr. Castellanos. Mr. Castellanos, welcome. IFRC has a unique model of working with national Red Cross societies. Very briefly, can you just sketch that out, first of all, so we can establish that?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to this dialogue. First of all, when IFRC was created in 1919, was created as a very local actor, post-World War I. And the idea was how a Red Crescent organization can be as local as possible in order to address humanitarian needs. If we go back to 1919 to now, what we are talking is not only that we are in 192 countries, but we are a network in 182,000 local offices around the globe. And that is the opportunity and is the challenge. Because when we are talking about being local organization means that it is not only to have an office in a capital or in the main cities. It's how to have what we call branches, and below branches what we have is local committees. And in those local committees, how their interaction goes with the community. So great level of our engagement is about how to ensure that our organization is capable to guarantee that at one point we can have common standards in the way we operate, but at the same time that is able to practice principles of humanitarian action in all the activities that we do. So that requires a huge investment of time and effort to ensure that the core of who we are can be maintained.
But the common standards are clearly important, and of course it's hugely important to have local offices. But one of the criticisms is that of local partners is that they don't feel that they can negotiate on equal terms, the terms of their partnerships. How does your organization try and overcome that, to create truly equal partnerships?
Yeah, first of all, we are a membership organization, and every partner has the same rights and same capacities to make decisions. They are the ones who decide who the leadership or organization is internationally. So to start with, they have a strong capacity to influence. They are in our governing board of the organization where we discuss humanitarian issues and when they have the capacity to influence the way we operate. But at the same time, when we look, and let me put you one example, COVID-19. Our approach for COVID-19 in 175 countries that were actively supported by our organization, although the 192 were operating, the domestic response plan was the driving force of the international cooperation. And this is how we work. National society's domestic response plan is the mechanism to ensure that we add value and show complementarity in what a national society wants to do. And that connection also links to how the national society interacts with the government. Let's remind that the Red Cross, Red Crescent societies are created by the states under the Geneva Conventions. And therefore, the Red Cross, Red Crescent societies plays an auxiliary role every time that there is a humanitarian crisis in a particular country.
But when you're trying to achieve that integration, where is the friction to be found? And how do you overcome it?
I would think that the tension will be always in terms of local solutions versus global understanding of the problems. And I think that that connection between local solutions and global understanding of the problems is one of the tensions. The second, we call in our job and our work is that we are agents for change. Sometimes local solutions don't see things that probably we are capable to change the mindset on how things are done. And the third one is always, it will be attention in terms of pressures, in terms of ensuring principles of humanitarian action, and how to guarantee that the national Red Cross, Red Crescent societies do not lose the core of who we are as an organization.
Mm. Okay, and another aspect then of creating equal partnership is, of course, funding. And we're talking, you mentioned the progress that the Grand Bargain has made with respect to multi-year funding, for instance. That is something you do at IFRC, for instance, as part of the Programmatic Partnership and the Disaster Relief Emergency Fund. How much of a culture shift or mindset shift did it take to move from kind of short-term funding cycles to long-term funding cycles?
Yeah, look, let me first thank DG ECHO because it's one of our biggest supporters on the disaster response emergency fund that allow us to have, is the quickest financial mechanism that we have in order to speed up any humanitarian operation that happens in any country of the world. And that is a highly relevant and important. But when we think about this, it is not about only the funding available or the capacity to make decisions. It's issues of accountability and risk management. And those are the three elements that we need to see how risk management is addressed and how we can support local capacities in that sense. But at the same time, how our operations become a seed in order to look into long-term activities for the future.
Is there a concrete example you can give of this in practice, where it's worked really well?
Well, I can tell you in 2021 we have activated over 136 DREF, Disaster Response Emergency Funds, which allows national societies to be the first responders, to be there first, to be able to act immediately, to engage with local authorities immediately. So the DREF constitutes one of the examples, but also DREF, we have a commitment of 25% of the DREF to be for anticipatory action, which allow us not to wait for a crisis to happen, but to be able to act quickly. And in different parts of the world, this is exactly what we are doing. And if you allow me, just very quickly, in Ukraine, just today the war is Ukraine, a month before the crisis happened, we already allocated financial resources for the Red Cross Society of Ukraine in order to start preparing themselves to do the work.
Okay, Michael.
Enrique, if I could just add, returning the thanks to Javier and his colleagues, because the Disaster Relief Emergency Fund, the DREF, is not only something that it was meant to make the IFRC happy, and the beneficiaries, obviously, but actually it also makes us happy as a donor. Because with this form of multi-annual flexible funding, we can act within hours. I've spent most of my career in development aid. And how proud was I when in development aid we were able to launch a project in a situation of emergency within 3 or 4 months. It was almost impossible to do that. Now, when I speak to my old colleagues from the development side, I tell them we have DREF. With DREF, we can mobilize aid within hours. And it happens almost every week when there's a natural disaster, for example, Tonga, for example. Yeah? This is something which also us as a donor helps to have very, very, very instantaneous, quick impact. So this is, I think, a good example that multi-annual funding and going local is not just a concession, it's not something generous by the donors, it also serves our purpose to be simply more efficient and faster.
Clear. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Ms. Castellanos, for your opening remarks. That clearly sketched out, what's happening now. Let's look ahead a little bit more with our next speaker, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Mr. Jiří Kozák. Jiří, the Czech Republic assumes the presidency of the Council of the EU over 6 months' time. All eyes will be looking to you and your team. Let me come around here. I can't see your eyes yet. I'm going to be over here. In terms of creating equal partnerships and boosting localization. So what are your plans to achieve that?
Well, thank you. And thank you for the invitation. And it's good to be here to discuss this important issue, to be on this distinguished panel. You know that the Czech Republic has been very active in localization. We have worked with our local partners in countries like Ukraine and Myanmar, to mention those who will be speaking today. And together with them, we have achieved a lot. We have been able to respond in conflicts and forced displacement and also natural disaster relief. So this partnership, long-term partnership with our local partners has proven how important it is to maintain these contacts even before the crisis. And we see it now with the Russian war. We are able to contact our Ukrainian partners even in the remote areas and work with them because we have already established the partnership before. What we also try to encourage the European Union is to include these local stakeholders in the pilot nexus implementation, which is very important in countries like Myanmar or Iraq, for example. You mentioned the Czech presidency, which is coming up really fast, starts in July, and we have prepared 3 points which we would like to focus when localization is concerned. The first one is to enhance learning from the already established partnerships, because we know that they are working, we know that they are successful, and we have to learn from them and implement.
And what does that mean in practice? Are you talking about workshops? Are you talking about data exchange?
Yes, share of experience, workshops, promoting the good partnerships, and giving the best practices to our partners in other countries as well. The second is. What we would like to focus is on the disaster risk reduction and the climate action, which is also very important. We need to be prepared, and we need the local partners to be prepared in this respect. And we would like to engage the EU funds in this as well. And last, we have to focus on systematic approach to the local partners in the humanitarian response. Be really prepared for the moment, and we don't want the moment to come, but when the moment comes, we need the partners to be prepared. They need to have capacity.
But what does a systematic approach mean?
Looking for the partners, working with the partners, ensuring that you have funds, ensuring that they have capacities. This is all systematic work that you have to be prepared for. So these are the issues when localization is concerned, when we will assume our EU presidency in July.
Maybe it's already covered by those 3 focus areas, but bearing in mind what Michael said at the beginning, under the grand bargain, this is maybe localization is maybe one of the areas that's made the least progress. What do you think are the bottlenecks holding up that progress?
Well, what we see, what we've learned from countries like Afghanistan, Mali, or Myanmar, is that working with local partners is very often perceived as the last resort, when it is already too dangerous for the governments or for the international organizations to be on the ground. They look for the local partners. And this is the problem we see. We feel that you have to be working with the local partners in advance, building their capacity, so when anything happens, they already have the capacity to work on the ground, because they are the contact point. They know the environment, they know the people, they know the needs of the people. So the capacity of these local partners needs to be prepared.
And as somewhat of an outsider, it just, I don't know, it seems strange, like bearing in mind how much discussion there is about this, how much literature there is about this. Is that really still the case, that local partners are seen as the last resort?
Well, we've seen it in many countries, and this is what the experience we have. It's been improving. We are trying to warn, and our experience shows, and around 30% of our humanitarian budget is implemented through the local partners. In addition to that, 50% is implemented in partnership with local partners. So we have this experience, and we see really how important it is to work with local partners.
Okay. Ms. Castellanos, did you have something to say on that?
No, probably I would say that local partners are the first resort.
It should be the first, yeah.
Yeah, in the sense that, you know, when a crisis happens, you name it, whatever it is the local actor the first one that is going to support, that will put the their own network activated to support? And that's why the investment and the shift to say, you were asking about equal partnership. And equal partnership in this case, when we shift the thinking to say the local actor must be understood as the first one that we have to enhance capacities, skills, etc., because that is going to be a determinant at the same time for this social cohesion that is going to be in a particular area, is going to increase conditions of stability and peace, is going to increase conditions of improvement of livelihoods, is going to increase conditions of mechanism for protection and support between each other. So I think the investment is extremely important to put it there.
Yeah, okay, that's clear. Michael, we'll continue shortly, Mike, because I just want to wrap up this section with a final question to Jiri. What is the one thing that you would ask member states to do that would make your job easier when you pick up the reins from July? What is your call to action, as it were?
Yeah, well, it is the presidency of the Czech Republic, but we are all on the same boat. So I would encourage everyone to trust our capacities, to be engaged, because it's a partnership of all of us. And I would encourage everyone to join us in learning from what we have achieved so far.
Okay, yeah, that's positive. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to invite our panelists up now to join us on the stage and continue our discussion. The first panelist is the founder of the Global Monitoring Initiative and co-founder of Alliance for Empowering Partnership. It is Smruti Patel. We have specific instructions not to trip, so yes, we did it. I say we. I had nothing to do with that. Okay, and from Arid Lands Development Focus, ALDEF, the CEO joining us virtually, Ahmed Ibrahim Abdi. Ahmed, are you online?
Yes, I
can see you there, yes. Great, thank you, welcome. And from Oxfam, the Director of Humanitarian Programs, Marta Valdez Garcia. Marta, welcome. Let's go to you first, Ms. Patel. What have you found are the best ways to get local actors, perhaps from the more marginalized groups, really engaged when it comes to localization?
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to be here and this invitation. So one thing is, and to removing some of the bottlenecks, to make sure that the marginalized group, and right now I'm going to talk about women-led organizations. So there's been a huge push by international community to put them forward and really putting the pressure on that there should be more funding for them. But in practice, what we see, so they are now being approached, but the practice, what we see, is inequitable partnership, so they're being exploited, right? So the practice in the way the partnership is being done is continuing in the same way. And I think, Michael, you mentioned earlier, it's about that traditional mindset. So if we don't shift that mindset to really think about what does equitable partnership mean, and I think you talked about, how do we make sure that we are making decisions together. They've been approached, but with they have no possibility to make the decisions about what type of program they're going to do, what kind of funding do they need. Everything is decided for them. So it's not an equitable partnership. So even if you increase the funding for women-led organization, they're not able to really reach the population that they need to reach. So I think that's an important part. I think the second thing is that to be more systematic, I'm sorry, I keep hearing about capacity building. I've been in this sector for almost 25 years, and we've been talking about it for a very long time. I see budgets where capacity building is constantly there. After 30 years, if we are still talking about it, there's something wrong with the way you're doing capacity building. They don't have capacity to sustain their capacity. Look at their institutions. Invest in the institutions, right? On their accountability. They can't keep their staff. When there is a big disaster, and I'm sure Ukraine will be one of those as well, you fund international organizations, they come, they expand their operations. Where do you think they get their staff from? It's the local organizations, right? You've invested all that funds to increase their capacity, but as soon as the expansion happens of international organizations, the capacity is brain drained into international organizations. So in a way, your actions are contributing to that, right? So I think we need to seriously think about how do you sustainably create civil society at local level that are able to do their work, right? They are able to
what's the answer
respond.
to that then? How do you do that sustainably? Very, very briefly. Is it just more money? Is that what you're talking about?
No, not only funding, because funding on its own is not enough, right? It's really a true partnership where you're making decisions together, listen to them. I would suggest for the European Union now is to have a permanent consultative group of local and national networks, just like you have Voice, that will give you advice on the guidelines, but permanent one, right? It's not just for now, but it goes on so you can really hear their voices directly, not via your INGO partners or UN partners. This is so, so important that you really hear directly from them.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Some very clear points there. Talking about the permanent consultative group, something a little bit akin to that is something that Mr. Abdi kind of has achieved through the ASL humanitarian network. Mr. Abdi, you've convened a sort of umbrella platform that sits above local NGOs and CSOs. What do you see as the benefits of having kind of this platform in between international and local NGOs?
Thank you very much. As you have said, the platform is consisting of around 30 local organizations and national organizations, includes more than 30% of women-led owned organizations. It's not a legal entity, so it provides a structured way of engagement and coming together, including conducting the assessments so that we can have their say on the table. The different AHN members have expertise in different sectors, and collectively we present the vulnerable locations in Kenya, and we complement our expertise, skills, and capacities. What we have done so far is we're doing a response now to the drought crisis in Kenya, in the Horn of Africa. And this is part funded by ECHO. And this has been happening since 2019 from a no regrets model approach or anticipatory approach of work, which we have been working in partnership with INGOs, who actually have been providing accompaniment, technical support, and back donor relationships, while the AHN members have been building on their own relationships. We've been leading on cash, wash, and protection interventions. And this is, in this year, we have moved a step closer as from 2019, this has worked into a locally led approach, and the consortium called the Kenya Consortium we are working with, now the coordination unit sits within the AHN secretariat, which is local. And from this networked way of working, it supports shifting of power and leadership to local actors across the different spaces of humanitarian development, peace building, gender justice, and climate change programming.
Very interesting.
It also enables us to put crisis on the table in an active early warning programming approach. So that is how we have been able to really achieve this.
Michael, is these networks? Do you think, and the umbrella organization? Do you think this is that you're hearing from from Abdi? Would you like to see more of that then?
Well, I definitely think so. I'm really happy that with the help of Ahmed Ibrahim, we get some positive examples. So when I said ECHO is one of the sinners, maybe we have been sinning a little bit less over the past time. But still, I have to say, because I'm in a self-critical mood this morning.
Good.
I have to say that Smruti is very much right, I think. We need a mindset. It's not that donors, and I'm not only speaking about the European Union, it's not that we are not working a lot with local partners, local NGOs. The question is, do we have a partnership with them, or is it a subcontracting relationship? And I'm afraid there is still some way to go to make it into the partnership. And therefore, I really loved your follow-up question to Smruti. How would you do it? So what I got from her, and I think this is definitely something which we should retain, is to, let's say, encourage the emergence of some sort of local voice. But I also believe that it's not only a dialogue between Brussels headquarters and local partners across the world. We also need to have this kind of dialogue on the country or the crisis level. Now, one of the assets of ECHO is, of course, that we have more than 50 offices in the world, in all the three major continents where we operate, or 4 continents actually. And maybe we probably also need to have kind of structures there. So far, when I'm traveling, I'm meeting, of course, the United Nations. After that, I go to the ICRC office and then to I4C. Then I also have a meeting with the NGOs, and I state that in the NGO meeting, there are the international NGOs, and maybe at the end of the table, there are also 2 or 3 local NGOs. Maybe I have to reverse my own mindset and meet first with the local NGOs and more systematically, not only to speak about how is it, do you have particular problems, but to have an atmosphere that encourages them to feed us regularly with not only their analysis, but also their ideas, how we could become more effective.
Fantastic. Go ahead.
Great. That's a really good first step, because we have been working with some donors actually to really encourage them when they're in the field, go and make space only to speak to local organizations. I'll tell you why. Because we have some who are very vocal about localization not being achieved at national level. But sometimes when they're very vocal, there is retaliation against them when they speak out in front of their international partners. So you really have to have a safe space where they are able to really talk from the heart. It's really, really important. And I think the second thing for you, what you were talking about, we need to think of it more systematically, right? It's not the ad hoc approach. If we have done some studies in the Philippines where we've done a multi-stakeholder process on localization and come up with a roadmap, we need to do that more systematically in every country, right? And one thing, local first, because they're there before during and after. They don't leave when the thing ends or the funding runs out. They're there permanently. And they're there for their people. So, make use of that collective thing. We've got so many disasters, and we heard yesterday, the needs are not going away. So we need to recognize the capacity that already exists. I don't want to hear anymore, we want to build a capacity. There is capacity. Recognize it, value it, fund it. Right?
Fund it, absolutely. Thank you very much, Smruti. And that strikes me as a very practical first step to anyone out there who convenes programs for trips to local regions. Let's flip it on its head. Let's spend more time with local organizations and not immediately go for local offices of international organizations, for instance. There are questions coming in from Slido, but first of all, I'd like to get Ms. Garcia's view on funding. As Smruti said, this is not just a case of throwing money at it. It's about how you spend the money, but funding is important. And there also needs to be a mindset shift from short-term cycles to multi-year cycles. What is your view on how we change that mindset? Ms. Valdez, I saw. Oh, yeah.
So, on changing the funding cycles.
Yes.
So I think that, I wanted to share a number of points about capacity strengthening that Smruti was already mentioning, because it's right that we have been building capacity. And I think that there are ways to strengthen capacity, but it is clearly the funding is required. The local organizations, they have the capacities, they are there. We have said that today. It was said that yesterday on the Nexus, that the local organizations, they work quite naturally across the Nexus. Something that for bigger organizations, they may challenge. So the funding is important but I think that it's a question of having more flexible and multi-year funding and how the funding is invested. Yeah? And I can give you a couple of examples that can show how the organizations can use the funding in a way that they strengthen their capacities. So let me give you an example in Somalia. We work with a network of organizations, national organizations, that is called the Nexus platform in Somalia. There are 8 organizations, yeah? And one of the things that they have developed internally is a unit in order to develop capacities. So they map the capacities of the members, they identify what are the needs, and they develop plans. And they support embedding staff in their organizations. So, for example, there has been an HR expert working with them, with one of their organizations for several weeks, supporting training staff and co-developing the policies. Because it is not about imposing and bringing global policies to the local actors. It's about developing with them the policies that they feel they need and are adapted to their context. Yeah? So I think that this is a good example, and how we can do that from international organizations. I think that we need to mainstream that. I think that there is a big power dynamic that needs to change. We need to ensure that we, by default, as Smruti was saying, we should be looking at locals before going to full implementation. Yeah? In some cases, there must be a dialogue with the partners and true partnership and listening to the partners about what they feel, what they need. Do they need us by themselves? Or they feel they have the capacities, what they need.
And how much flexibility and autonomy should they have to decide how to spend the money? What programs to support? What do you think?
So I think that they should be part of the decision-making, not only on the specificities of the design of the programs and therefore how the money is invested. I think that local organizations should have more a voice in the design of the responses. We have seen steps, for example, in the UN coordination system in some places where some local organizations are part of the humanitarian country teams. So I feel they should have a say in how is the design of the full response. And if we have a true partnership, it's not for international organizations to design a program and then to give that to local partners as subcontractors, but co-design the program. And in some cases, giving us support for them to design the program if they have the full kind of capacity fledged to do so and they feel reinsured, and to give them support for organizational development, not for capacity building. So it's to strengthen what they have and to be careful not to harm them, because in some cases when we go big, we can harm them, as it has been said.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, Smruti, final point before we go to public questions?
Yeah, just a quick one. I've been hearing a lot about complementarity, right? We need to work together. But the problem is that, and this is a mindset shift again, right? Is the way when the practice is, how does the local organization complement us, rather than how can we complement them? That is a different way of working, right? If you because I hear a lot about complementarity, but it's always about, well, how can we use them? And I hear this a lot when the operations are there. How can we use the local organization? No. How can we make sure we complement them so they can do their job better?
But complementarity, I guess it goes down the chain as well, because the local organization will also be looking for people who complement them. But do you need a mind shift change there as well? Like, how does a local organization complement the people literally with their hands in the dirt?
And I think that's the accountability, and we talk a lot about it. I've been working for this for many years. Accountability is absolutely key, right? And they know it as well. So, but having the space to be accountable, if they can't decide with the population how to design the projects and programs, if they don't have that freedom, they can't be accountable. So they're in a bind. Yeah. We expect accountability from them, but we don't give them the space.
Yeah, okay. Everyone wants to contribute, which is great, because this is exactly the spirit that we should be having this panel in. But let's go to the public questions, okay? The first one comes in, and it is, most of the local organizations are often male-dominated and often demonstrate unequal power relations in the communities. How does IFRC engage women?
Within the network, 52% of our network are females, to start with. And
are they in decision-making capacities?
Yeah, I'm going to there. Now, we have a commitment to achieve that we will reach by 2030 in equal decision-making capacities. But just to make an example, in the past 2 years, we have increased the percentage-wise in terms of decision-making capacities within the network from 24% approximately to 32% in decision-making capacities. So this is part of the cultural shift as well. As an organization, we as an IFRC, 50% of our board has to be male and female. And that's a clear commitment. In terms of management, our commitment by 2025 is 50-50. Okay. So the organization is driving by example as well, but when we look into the local level, I just want to flag something. There is not such a thing of community work and assessment that is a good one if it's not gender represented. Mm-hmm. And it's so important in different cultures, in different parts of the world, that you have to strive for that.
Yeah, okay, clear. Thank you very much. Next question says, DG ECHO only partners with NGOs with their HQ in the EU. Those EU NGOs are partnering with local organizations. How can DG ECHO engage with those local organizations directly?
This is true. It has to do with the legal basis that we have. Our legal basis has the beauty and also the ugliness of being a quarter of a century old. The beauty is that as it is so old, we have, let's say, a lot of flexibility that maybe today the lawmakers wouldn't give us any longer. The ugliness is that now new things come to the fore, like, for example, partnering with local organizations that simply were not foreseen at the time. By the way, this is no discrimination against African or Asian NGOs. This is also, so to say, something that hits very much Swiss, British, or Norwegian NGOs. No, but there are two possibilities to overcome this as long as we work with this legal basis. On the one hand, when it comes to funding, we have developed, so to say, intermediary structures. We have developed structures that basically are able to take ECHO funding and then at the same time are managing local contracts with local NGOs exclusively. We have this in Turkey, the so-called LIFT program. We have other examples, and we want to do more of that. And actually, when I said at the beginning, we want to have your input here for the guidance, it's exactly in order to get good ideas how we can do this at a larger scale. Secondly, of course, the real partnership dimension is not limited to funding, obviously. It's about dialogue. And nothing in our legal basis, let's say, defends or interdicts us to have this kind of dialogue structure, to bring local partners to Brussels or for us to go there and have a structured dialogue. I would, however, want to make one point. This is not about local is good and international is bad. We are not in a bipolar world here. We have seen examples, for example, in Africa, where working with local NGOs is also difficult because maybe they want to operate in another part of the country where the ethnic composition of the local NGO is not adapted, so to say, and that leads to a lot of resistance. So it's about the right mix. Sometimes working through international organizations is the right approach. Sometimes it's about national NGOs. Sometimes it's about regional NGOs. Sometimes it's about doing something directly.
I mean, it's not a binary world, but ultimately, is DG ECHO prepared to give less money to the UN and more money to local organizations? That readiness has to be there, and that is a binary choice.
We don't have quotas, Inika. We don't have quotas. It's about who, in a given situation, is the first and the most effective one to operate. Very often, this is the UN because they are everywhere. But the same thing is true for IFRC. You're also everywhere. If Smriti is right and the capacity is there, then we can also work everywhere. But one has to be honest here, I think. There are certain large-scale crises, large-scale interventions that are necessary that go beyond the capacity of local NGOs. There, for example, you need to have big international organizations. So it's about analyzing what is necessary in the context and then use the right tool.
Thank you very much, Michael. We have a question from the room.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Svetlana from Ukraine. I'm here representing a task force of NGOs, and I have a practical question. How can Ukrainian NGOs engage effectively with foreign organizations on the spectrum of challenges that we are trying to resolve right now? What are your recommendations about the right mindset, the right approach and principles to engage foreign organizations? I'm asking this question from the very practical perspective. We are around 10 NGOs that work with Ministry of Health and Ministry of Euro integration. We don't have a single international organization appearing in our meetings, although we do know they operate on the ground. We have the awareness, but it kind of happens in parallel and we do not come across each other in our daily interactions.
Very clear. Thank you very much for your question.
So I just, one of the things, and this happens often, there are local organizations, local networks existing, but when the big international, and you're right, we do need international operations as well, it's not one or the other, but when they arrive, they need to, they need to act as guests rather than masters, right? It is the mindset thing. There are these local organizations existing, but we don't even coordinate with them. We just do our own thing in our little bubble. That bubble, international bubble, needs to burst.
Yeah, but the question here is from the local organization, how do they coordinate? Ms. Garcia, I can see you're eager to say something.
So, no, I think that is right that in some cases, in relation to the timeliness of the response, these structures are neglected. I don't think this is the case, generally speaking. I think that in all the cases, there are more and more coordination structures, and local actors and local organizations are brought to the conversation. Yeah? It can be possible that in some cases it is overlooked, but more and more there is this coordination. But I think that the point is, and I think that we can put in place very practical things to ensure that we engage, and the local actors, they are leading, and they have because it is not about localize what we do globally. It was said yesterday, and I thought that that was interesting. It's about giving the space to local actors. It's ensuring that we have different power dynamics. It's ensuring that we give power to local actors. How we do that? Let's engage with networks that are existing. There are networks of all local organizations. We cannot pretend that because we don't know, those networks don't exist and there is no coordination. So potentially we don't need to set up new coordinations, but understand what are the coordination mechanisms that already exist. This is the first thing, because they are working, they are there, they speak, they work. That is the first thing. So the second thing is that we need to build and support a mapping of capacities that they do. It's not us mapping the capacities they need. It's them ensuring that they can map their capacities and develop plans. ECHO can very well include those mapping of capacities and needs in the HIPs. It is done already for the preparedness. That can be done. It's a practical action. ECHO as well can ensure that in the funding for the partners, they include a criteria about the percentage of the funding that is going to local actors, practical action, But quite importantly as well is to ensure that the local organizations are part of the conversation and critical part of designing the guidance, because otherwise the vision is going to be only a global vision. So learning, I'm very pleased that there is going to be this learning that is going to be proposed by the new
Czech presidency,
that is going to be essential, learning from the action, because it has been said, there are very good initiatives. Turkey is a good initiative. There are some pooled funds that are working well. Why we don't learn from that and scale it? It's not a question of not possibility, it's a question of willingness.
Yeah. Well, let's, Michael, I mean, also going back to the question and to build on what Smruti and Ms. Garcia have said, here we have a very real, urgent example of a group of NGOs, local NGOs, coordinating. They have the capacity, they know the terrain, they know the language, obviously. How do they go about starting a conversation and getting help?
Well, first I wanted to reassure Marta that our thoughts go exactly in your direction. Secondly, on your very concrete question, our Ukrainian colleague, unfortunately there's not one answer to your question. There is one answer per donor. Jiří will give you another answer than I give you. And, you know, the Italians, the French, the Germans, the Swiss will give you answers according to their legal system. If you want to find out how as a Ukrainian NGO at this moment in time, in the next 3 months, you can have access to ECHO funding, my best advice would be partner with an European NGO, for example, a Polish or a German or Italian NGO that is a certified, recognized ECHO partner, build a consortium with them, and then as a member of this consortium, you can have access to European funding very quickly.
Mr. Castellanos, final remark before one final question.
I would probably add one point. You already mentioned that you have contact with the health ministry. And if there is not a platform for coordination, build the platform. Promote the idea of the platform. Try to engage with other partners. Go to the Ukrainian Red Cross. With the Ministry of Health, with the other 10 NGOs. And if there is not a platform, create a platform for the coordination. Right now, the operation, if we look, everyone is stabilizing, setting up the capacities in order to ensure that the operation is running and moving, etc. But at the same time, is the moment to look into those gaps in terms of coordination and building up. And sometimes organizations like yours, or what these organizations are trying to do, is to say, can we be together in order to ensure that we can have a comprehensive support? And that is exactly the complementarity of the action, because that network may create another network and may reach to what you just mentioned, that there will be donors that may be willing to support a comprehensive plan. The risk is that everyone is doing a different thing, and then comes waste, duplication, etc. So I think use the driving force of the motivation in order to bring this up in terms of a coordination platform. That would be my advice.
Okay, thank you very much. Some good practical tips there. I hope you've been helped out a little bit, and all the best to you. One final question before we move on with the program. I'd like to pose this one to Mr. Kozak. The most local level is usually non-formal organization. How do the panelists work with local non-formal organization? What's your vision on that, do you think? Because that's going to have to be a part of training, I imagine. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it has been already mentioned that one of the key is networking. If you are an informal entity, then you have to partner with somebody who has some form of legal entity, who has some capacities, who is already established in the networks. Because you have to realize that from the point of the donor, from the point of the government, you have to follow some legal procedures. You are binded by the legal code of your country, of the European Union, and so there are some rules you have to follow, and the contact has to be somehow formalized. And that's why I mentioned the capacity building, and that's why I mentioned that we have to work with the local partners well in advance before anything happens. And with the case of Ukraine, it's very complicated because nobody could have predicted, or maybe we could have predicted, that Putin goes mad and he goes to wage war against Ukraine. But when you have the climate change, then you can project what will be going on, and you can prevent and you can prepare. And this is where the partnerships have to be formalized.
Yeah, we can talk about risk management later as well. We need to move on, Smruti. But lots of questions coming in, so do keep them coming in. Right now, we're going to move on to the next part of our program, which includes a couple of interventions from the floor, actually virtually. Then we'll share the outcome of some regional consultations, a couple more interventions after that, and we'll finish with some reflections on all of the above from our speakers and panelists. So, the first intervention is from the director of the Humanitarian Policy Group at Overseas Development Institute at the ODI, and that is Sorcha O'Callaghan. I apologize if these Irish names, I don't know how to pronounce Sorcha. It's probably...
That's perfect. Sorcha is perfect. Hello, everyone, and thanks for a really interesting discussion. In HPG's research and work, we found that despite the many commitments to locally led humanitarian action or localization, that reforms in practice are slow, and that many of them actually perpetuate the current internationally led status quo. And we've heard that a little bit in the response to our colleague in Ukraine. And for me, this raises questions about the ability of the humanitarian system to truly reform itself, so that national organisations and local organisations are seen not just as responders, but they're seen as leaders within the traditional humanitarian response. So I'm wondering, how can we best tackle that? So that locally led humanitarian action is really seen as the first responders. And how do we tackle the barriers which are trapping many local and national actors in subordinate positions to international organisations?
Thank you very much, Sorcha. Thank you. Our next intervention comes from Dr. Win Tung Ki of local NGO KMSS Myanmar on ways to achieve equal partnerships between international and local actors. Dr. Win, are you with us? Yes.
Yes, here I am. Thank you. I would like to mention some bottlenecks that hindering the equal partnership between the locals and international, and also I would like to propose some way forward to address. So one bottleneck that we are facing is a power imbalance between the donors and local actors. When I say donors, it includes the international intermediary organizations who are also behaving as the donors. So equal partnership is mentioned, but in reality, it is not happening. Second bottleneck that I would like to mention here is the rigid aid mechanisms, which is not very conducive with the local context. This is 21st century, and crises are really changing. The patterns of crises, the conversation, and all the global arenas are changing. But we are trying to solve with the 20th century ways of working to address the humanitarian crises. So what happened? Local responders are torn between the life-saving missions to save people's lives and then try to comply with the donor demand, which is really, really unrealistic for us.
Dr. Wynne, can you just elaborate on rigid? What do you mean when you say rigid aid mechanisms?
Rigid aid mechanism means that, for example, we have to really comply with the due diligence. Due diligence are very, very sort of demanding for us to do the life-saving intervention, where minutes and hours are counted, but we had to wait days, weeks to get the approval. This is one example. Okay, for the third bottleneck I would like to mention is the insufficient localization commitment by the international partners, especially with their local and national leadership position. So we are very happy to hear, we are very encouraged to hear from this high quality leadership. But when we get back to our country, I think the stories are the same. There is no change. So for it, I would like to propose 3 ways of working. I think our fourth speaker already mentioned about it. I think the donors, the international actors, please engage with us as directly as frequent as possible so that you can know the ground situation and there can be a better power sharing between the locals and international actors. Secondly, to address the rigid aid mechanism, I would like to propose that we are not asking about the absolute flexibility, but we have to do some kind of joint formulation of the compliance mechanism. It can be a spectrum. We have to regularly review collectively by the donors, by the international actors, and by the local actors, which is really realistically meet the needs of the people. So it is not one size fits all for all the situation. Last but not the least is, I would like to propose our international actors through the donors to capacitate their country directors and country leadership on localization. If all the country leaders and country directors are really the same committed as you are here, I think our job of the local will be really, really easy, and then we can really lead the localization agenda. If I may propose more, keep localization as one of their leadership performance indicators so that it will be more a kind of conducive figure. Thank you, over to you.
Now, Dr. Wynne, thank you very much for your, yeah, absolutely. There's applause here in the audience. Doesn't surprise me, very impassioned plea there. We can sense your frustration, but also you were very solutions focused as well, suggesting things. And I definitely would love to pick up on that point. Dr. Wynne was frustrated about unreasonable due diligence requests and the amount of time it takes. But anyway, we'll get to that. Time now for the outcome of the regional consultations. And to share that, we have the head of Coalición por Venezuela. Oh, what an appalling Spanish pronunciation. Sorry, Juan Carlos. An umbrella organization of Venezuelan diaspora civil society, Juan Carlos Viloria. And you're going to come onto stage. Would you like to do it from the lectern or from there? Okay, go ahead.
Good morning, and thank you so much for this opportunity. As he mentioned, I'm the president of Coalition for Venezuela, a federation who brings together 81 organizations in 20 countries. I live in Barranquilla, in Colombia, in Latin America, and I feel very proud to represent our people, but also my country. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm not only here to represent our crisis, the second largest in the world, but also to talk for all the migrants and refugees around the world. One of the gaps that we can address in this forum, Your Excellencies, the donors, and all the people who are representing here an international organization, is the financial and also the administrative requirements that all the donors or the international agencies ask to the local organization. When you invest in social capacity building in our communities, we have demonstrated that we can become $1 in $20 almost in social activities, cultural activities, strengthen the capacity building of our organization. So We are working in Latin America, for example, with the Canadian government, with the US government, but also we have received some funds through the international organization from the German government, Italian, and other countries of the European Union through the R4B platform. We are actually 122 partners in the R4B platform, the Response for Venezuela, led by UNHCR and IOM, and only 24 organizations are from the civil society, and from those, only 14 organizations are from the diaspora. In my country, in Colombia, there are also 11 organizations involved in this process. So my compromise as local actor is always to be in this position to work with you. And in the next European Humanitarian Forum, I would like to know if we can demonstrate that we have been implementing this recommendation and all this contribution. We have the experience, we know the communities, we are professional, as I mentioned yesterday, so don't look to another actors because we are already working. I have here from yesterday all day long and also in this panel, we need to, but we are already doing. So the thing is, how can we honor the grand bargain? How can we hear really the voices of the local actors and involve them after we cross this door in this room, that they need to include them in not only in the formulation of the process, as mentioned Marta, but also in all the planning process of the project, also in the implementation. That's for the moment. I'm really interested to work more with you. Our organization are already working and they can improve their work with your support, and we are ready to work with you.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. Thank you very much. Okay, two more statements from the floor. The first is an online intervention from another of our Ukrainian colleagues. She's the founder of a Ukrainian disability NGO. She is Tatiana Barantsova. And Tatiana has a translator with her, I understand, who will translate live.
No.
Hi, Tatiana.
Доброго дня. Good morning, everyone. Дуже дякуємо вам за підтримку, яку відчуває Україна саме в цьому напрямку громадської організації. We are so thankful to you for your support that we feel now in Ukraine, because you know the situation in Ukraine, and it's very important to feel your support. Thank you for this. Я хотіла би сконцентрувати увагу на тому, що дуже підтримую вас, кожного, хто виступає, на тому, що надзвичайно важливе виділення фінансування для громадських організацій. And I want to support you in this discussion that you have now, that it's very important to provide finances for local organizations that can implement projects on the ground and can help people there in this emergency situation. Наприклад, в Україні саме громадські організації дуже впливають на те, щоб були створені умови для розумного пристосування та доступності. And here in Ukraine, local NGOs help to provide assistance based on the needs and according to the conditions to provide accessible conditions and accessible facilities for people. Еще я хотела бы сказать, что общественные организации людей с инвалидностью очень эффективны именно в том, чтобы показать, где находятся самые уязвленные категории людей с инвалидностью. And NGOs for people with disabilities concentrate their attention to show the conditions of people with disabilities in Ukraine, because they are one of the most vulnerable category of people who live in Ukraine, and they need special help and assistance.
Навіть в ситуації війни саме громадські організації підказують державі, де головні потреби і де головні проблеми під час війни у людей.
And local NGOs for people with disabilities help even our state authorities in Ukraine to pay attention and to find out what the most urgent needs of people with disabilities, because they know from the community what are the most urgent needs of these people.
Саме інклюзивний підход є надзвичайно важливим, і він важливий не тільки для людей з інвалідністю, а для всіх громадян. Тому ми дуже дякуємо вам за таку підтримку.
Yes, and inclusive approach to this situation is very essential, not only for people with disabilities, but for all citizens of Ukraine, especially in this emergency situation. So thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you very much for taking the time. Stay well, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, our next online intervention is from Philippe de Korte, who is the UN Habitat Emergency Director. Philippe is online and ready to talk, I see.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning from New York. Not yet my first coffee. I just wanted to add 3 points to the discussion. One, when we talk about localization, place matters. Localization cannot be abstract. Operating in an urban neighborhood with apartment buildings in Kharkiv in Ukraine is different than operating in a rural setting in Darfur. Habitat, I4C, ECHO, and United States and local governments have set up an alliance on urban crisis back in 2016 to really figure out how we can localize humanitarian response in urban settings. 2, we haven't heard it yet today, but local governments are key to localization. Localization cannot be limited exactly to transferring implementing roles of international organizations to local NGOs, which clearly people have argued against also today. Local governments have a mandate and an accountability towards their communities. We need to maximize that role and responsibility they have. 3, effective collaboration between humanitarian actors and local governments is not a given. They do not speak the same language necessarily. On the alliance side, exactly, we've developed a protocol to facilitate that conversation, so the collaboration can be concrete and adapted to the specific context. Work has also been done to make sure that local governments understand the humanitarian principles and where humanitarian actors are coming from. In the response in Ukraine, we cannot get it wrong. Local governments need to be the anchors for local coordination and be empowered to play their role, including also when it comes to accessing finance. It's also key to effectively operate in the humanitarian development nexus. We can be saving lives in one neighborhood while restoring basic services and fixing buildings in another. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Thank you. We've got lots of questions that have come in. Questions for Abdi online. But before we get to those, let's first reflect on what we just heard, some of those reflections. Let's start with Dr. Wins. Who would like to take that? Smruti, I thought you looked like you wanted to say something.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Win. That was really very concrete things that he said. I think his point that actually already existing, so this goes back to the policy and the mindset in terms of the shift that's required. I know that European Union at the moment doesn't fund local organizations, but there are local organizations who've been funding and managing funds for local organizations, smaller organizations, for a long time now. So it's really about how will you also ensure that you can work with them as intermediaries, right? Because it's happening. There are some really good examples in Bangladesh, in other countries, and provide maybe local funds where you experiment, because you're saying that perhaps it's to do with the risk element, right? So there are ways of experimenting. I think you've already started, but we need to scale it up. And what I want to say is, I think the way the funding is happening at the moment is just helping them to survive. You need to help them to thrive. We need them to thrive so that they can respond quickly when it's necessary. So it's that investment that's needed, but the mind shift is the key. And I think it was already mentioned that actually often the way sometimes the international organization, local branches in countries and the way they respond is really harmful for local civil society. So how do we make sure that mind shift happens? It's really about open mind, open heart, but open will, right, to change. Because without the will, nothing is really going to change.
Okay, Marta and then Michael.
Yeah, I wanted to build on that because I think that Dr. Twin has raised attention on quite important topic that is about the function of the intermediary. Yeah, and to which extent this is a function and how this function needs to be played. So if the function is just a function of funding intermediary, so funding flow, yeah, it may not be the best option. However, I think that we can and we should be thinking about this intermediary role differently. Looking at this intermediary role as a way to change power dynamics and ways of working and put in local organizations at the center. And we could be doing that. We have done that in a number of countries. I'm not suggesting this is perfect and is working all around, but there are ways to ensure that the local organizations that we set homogeneous and very horizontal relationships in designing what and in supporting, and even this intermediary capacity could be about sharing resources and sharing capacities to ensure that the local actors can develop these structures, because it is a question of sustainability. The local actors, if there is an emergency and they get funding, they have a peak in capacities. And then when the response is getting down, the capacity is reduced. So how we can help, how international intermediaries are going to be supporting through discretionary funding for those kind of capacities, that is a key question. And I think that needs to, all of us, we should be challenging ourselves and trying to see how we do that in favor of this change in power dynamics. That's quite important.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, when listening to Dr. Wynne, one word came to my mind, and this word is granularity. Because I think he gave us a very good example on why we need to have a real dialogue with real partners. This is not in order to come with lofty ideas and theories. This is about solving concrete issues. Now, his concrete issue, if I understood it correctly, was the notion of due diligence. Now, if you are a priest, you live in the fear of the Lord, or at least you should. If you're an EU official that manages money, you live in the fear of the Court of Auditors and the European Parliament. So I cannot promise Dr. Wynne to do away with due diligence. But I can sit down with him and hear what his problems are, make him understand what my constraints are, and maybe come to intelligent solutions. And that, I think, is something we have to do with local partners in Myanmar, in Colombia, in Ukraine, in Somalia, in Mali, in Syria, where the discussion, so to say, becomes concrete. We have to do that. And I think then it's not only that the donor needs to change in order to make due diligence more diligent, but sometimes also local partners have to understand that there is a reason behind this, because a donor is called donor and not ATM. A donor also has...
To be fair to Dr. Wynne, I don't think he was saying do away with due diligence. He just said it took a long time, weeks, and we're talking about, we started off by saying, at the start of the Ukraine crisis, money was being sent over or transferred within hours, or programs were started up within hours. And here, if something is urgent and it's taking weeks to get a response on due diligence, that's not working. That's a system that's broken.
Well, it was transferred not within hours, but within a couple of days, but not to local NGOs, rather to establish the ECHO partners, who have gone through a very long process in order to convince us that they can apply European accountability rules. Mm-hmm. Now, if I had the possibility of meeting Dr. Wynne, and hopefully we can do this, perhaps I can, let's say, give him some hints on how to comply with our criteria in a smart way, but maybe he can give me some stories I can bring back to our supervisory authorities to basically tell them, listen, what you require us to do simply is counterintuitive, simply is absurd. You need to give us a little bit more tolerance. So we need to have this kind of dialogue. Doesn't mean that we are going to find solutions. I cannot promise anything, but at least having a dialogue on these issues usually is the first step towards improvement.
Clear. Mr. Castellanos.
Yes, thank you. I think this is really, really important points being raised and what Michael said. At the end of the day, the balance between value for money and value for people has one word that will affect directly or indirectly to any institution, which is trust. And to build trust, like it or not, is critical to invest on capacity enhancement. It's critical to invest on the strengthening conditions to guarantee accountability, to guarantee transparency, to guarantee long-term perspective. So capacity enhancement is a precondition in order to have proper engagement and partnership. Otherwise, I can hear you, Michael, but it happens to all of us, that at the end of the day, if we don't perform as we should, we have a problem that will affect the credibility of any institution or organization. So I think we have to realize that and land to the reality that when we talk about capacity enhancement is not only to have local actors that are capable to deliver humanitarian services, but are also that can be accountable and ensure that are able to give to the donor community, but also to the local community, the quality of the support that is being expected from them.
Yeah.
The other element, if I would look into the difference when we look about intermediary, we have to build the shift. In many organizations, what is being called is the implementer partner. We have to go to a partnership engagement. And you know what is the problem of implementer partner? Our organization around the network works with different organizations that look the Red Cross and Red Crescent and implement a partner. The problem of that is that the financial resources do not go to strengthen capacity. And that's why is a critical, when we talk about implementer partner, it has to be eliminated. We have to talk about partnership. And partnership sustains towards the time when we are talking about organizations that will be trusted organizations at local level and able to implement activities of local level.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Trust is key. Makes me.
Can I add? There's one guy you forgot in this session. I'm online.
Yes, Abdi, we do have a question for you.
As a panelist, yes.
Yes. Do you have a contribution you'd like to make right now? Because there's also a question specifically for you. Go ahead, though.
For me, yeah. Yeah, surely this whole debate and taking to the last mile really requires banking and investing in proactive local-driven readiness models. For this to really happen, then what is really required is we are looking at a place where we're doing a self-assessment of ourselves. Then those capacity plans are ready. And then we look at the joint plans for a number of local organizations. And for those who are ready, looking at a harmonized kind of tool, which we can do a due diligence with an independent kind of institution. If that is available, then technically we're looking at a pool of local organizations that are ready and able to take up the role as required. On top of that, it also requires building in issues of M&E and independent community response and feedback mechanism, which we're already doing as local actors down on the ground. It also requires fostering that local ownership, then building on meaningful and equitable relationships to strengthen risk management. So as we are already going in that field, what we are really missing is the aspect of saying capacity is technically where the sector is really talking about. But if we are taking that meaningful approach ourselves, is there a dedicated way of looking at and in building within the ongoing responses plus planned upcoming responses as well? And then finally, what I would really have liked to say is to the institutional donors, there's really need to really put how equitable partnerships are really being demonstrated in proposals and project implementation by the intermediaries, and what are the KPIs really to measure and acknowledge this localization actually is really happening. These are key critical things that need to really be put into place. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdi. I mean, you touched on so many of the points there, really, which were in the question that was posed to you. And the question was, in your view, how can international NGOs and donors support and strengthen the existing local networks? I don't know. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Because you did.
I would like to just add one more key thing. You see, the space in the humanitarian system is already built in an top-down kind of approach. For it really to be tilted on its head down, then what really will be required is we walk this journey, all of us together, because there's a role for every actor to really play in this field. And for us to really be able to do it, then that network space, that decision-making processes, in the coordination, we have the space for the local actors and national actors as well, plus umbrella organizations. There's also need to really have that deliberate line of capacity strengthening from a self-readiness kind of approach being inbuilt into the proposals as we go forward. And I think those are the key things to really make the thing function forward. Because local actors, if they don't have the ICR really cut out for them, for the work they do, even if, as I'm saying, they have transferred 30% through local partners or 70%. How much of the ICR was really provided to those local actors so that they can keep the continuity of capacity to stay within there? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, let's take some questions from the public again. This one's coming from Véronique de Geoffroy. Are all humanitarian principles applicable to local actors, or shouldn't we reconsider, adapt them for local actors? What do we think? Yeah, Ms. Garcia and Mr. Castellanos.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. There has been a research done, I think that a year and a half ago, about local organizations and the application of humanitarian principles, because there are those questions about local organizations can be neutral, can be truly impartial, and it's quite interesting not only to see the results of the research, but as well what local organizations think about international organizations' application of the humanitarian principles. Yeah? So I think that not because the organizations are local or national, they cannot adhere to the principles. Yeah? I think that all of us as a community, as an international community, we should be thinking about how we adhere, how we practice, yeah, and to be much more explicit about it. So I don't think that local actors per se, yeah, just because they are local actors, they have a problem with the humanitarian principles. It is a question about how the organization works, how the organization is making decisions, and how they apply the principles on the day-to-day. So it's not by nature. There may be other international organizations having problems with the humanitarian principles. And there is this example, and there is as well a couple of analyses done by ALNAP 2 or 3 years ago about a deep research in a number of contexts by local actors on how they apply humanitarian principles. Really, really interesting research.
Where is it? You need to tell us who did the research. This sounds like...
So the ALNAP, I mean, I will look now for the one that it was shared a year and a half ago, because it was done by a platform, a network of local organizations. So let me look for that, and I will let you know before we close. But I don't think that there is a problem because of the nature.
Okay, perfect. Mr. Castellanos?
Yeah, probably to do the question, the key question is, what is the objective of principles of humanitarian action? And what is the end goal of it, right? And I agree. It doesn't matter if you can be local or international. But the question is, the end goal at the end is access, acceptance, capacity to engage with different actors, and capacity to sustain humanitarian action. So if I give you an example, you can have the access by a government to say you can enter to this geographical area. but you might not have the access by the local community. You may have the acceptance of a government to enter to a particular area, but you might not have the acceptance of the local community. So it's crucial when you perform principles of humanitarian action means that you are known for applying it in any circumstances. Not today yes, tomorrow no. And that is what differentiates between the trust that a local level or national level may have in community. So my answer to the question is, what is the end goal? And sometimes applying principles of humanitarian action may be very hard because you will have to take hard decisions because you want to guarantee access to the people in need.
Clear. Okay.
Let me be extremely blunt. If there was a general, justified doubt that local actors can comply with the principles of humanitarian aid, this would be, for us, the end of the localization debate. Because as a donor, we are obliged by EU primary law to comply with humanity, neutrality, independence, non-discrimination, and so forth. If a local partner cannot at least promise that, I have absolutely no mandate to finance that local partner. So we can stop the debate here. But fortunately, I agree with you, especially with Marta, that this is not really an issue. There can be justified individual cases where we have to apply a little bit of doubt. But in general, I wouldn't subscribe to this kind of doubt.
I'm not sure I understand that, though. I mean, on the one hand, you're saying they're set in stone, non-negotiable, but there is some room to interpret them slightly differently.
No, did I say that? Then my English is worse than I thought. No, but I mean, I can understand that, for example, in a certain country, let's just construe a theoretical case. You have a country that is multi-ethnic. You have a crisis situation in a region of that country that is dominated by one ethnic group. You have a national NGO that is dominated by representatives of another ethnic group. And in such a case, it could be that there are misperceptions. So in that case, maybe you don't want to work with that national NGO in that part of the country. That is a matter of scrutiny during the project selection. But if I had a general doubt that working with local organizations could, so to say, be in full conformity and implementation of the 4 humanitarian principles, frankly, then this debate would be superfluous.
Okay.
Can I give you the reference to the research? Yeah?
Yes,
it is
very
called,
quickly, and then we've got time just for Smruti, and then we've got to move on.
It is called Association and Humanitarian Principles in Context of Conflict, Voices from Nigeria and South Sudan, and is Dr. Jok Maduk Jok, that is the principal researcher. So just recommend the reading of this paper because it's quite interesting.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Smruti.
Yeah, I was just going to say, actually, sometimes that is used as a pretext, right, to do a blanket negative narrative on local organizations and localization. So please look beyond it, because sometimes I also see that, they say, oh, local actors cannot be neutral or they cannot be impartial. But international organizations have local employees. They are from that society as well. There's not a magic cloak, right? So just because they're international staff doesn't mean suddenly they are neutral or impartial. It should apply to everybody. Actually, local organizations, I've seen in Chechnya, where I worked in other places, they know how to negotiate access. They have real skills. They can see because they know what the local situation is and make the decisions and be able to make the decisions. And that tool, the principles are there to make choices and decisions. It's not just for being there, right? And at some point, you will make a decision that actually for humanitarian access and for humanity, perhaps we can't do this and this, but it's a deliberate choice, right? So I think there has to be some nuance on this about how you make decisions on the response. How do you reach that population? And local actors know how to do that. And they work in the most difficult situations, especially when international actors are not present in Syria and other places. It's them who are taking the risk. So, and they're the ones who are making those decisions. So we have to be really careful about some of these negative narratives and really open the mind and trust. Trust is so key, because this is the kind of thing that breaks trust, right? So we have to be really careful about some of these statements that come from some actors to stop us working with local actors on this. Thanks.
Clear, thank you very much. If we're brief, we have time for a couple more questions. Yes, you get a little round of applause there for someone in the audience, Muruti. Oh, more, it started. Okay, this question is from Darina Pelowska, and she asks, how can a more equitable way of working together with local organizations be implemented in the decision-making throughout project management? Michael?
You seem to give me all the difficult questions. I think, in a way, we discussed this before. I mean, this is we need to have an ongoing dialogue with local representatives in all stages of the programming and project implementation process. So, rather than, for example, putting our humanitarian implementation plans together, deciding what we want to finance in a given crisis situation, and then look for a nice organization that implements that, we need to have a consultation, as we do actually, with partners in a country before we even put the analysis together of what is necessary. And of course, the same thing then has to be done on the level of the individual project. So it must be more than a bank transfer. It must be more than just drafting terms of reference for a project, making 1 or 2 payments, and basically then asking for the final report. There needs to be an ongoing dialogue, which is very demanding, including also in terms of human resources. But I think that is the price for partnership.
Okay, one more difficult question for you, Michael. How can DG ECHO or other donors ensure that its partners provide adequate overhead payments for local organizations?
I don't know, honestly. I know that we require them to do that, of course. This is part of the contractual arrangements, and this is part of the auditing process and so forth. And we need to have a whistleblowing system in case somebody doesn't really comply with what he or she signed up to. But I'm sure that I love this French word perfectible. Nothing is perfect. There's always scope for improvement.
And one for Mr. Castellanos. How do panelists propose to address risk management challenges associated with local organizations that have modest resources?
Something that we are doing and growing a lot in terms of risk management is in co-creation to develop a real risk management approach, where at the level of local actors, national actors, partners around the table discuss about risks, share the risk, and monitor the risk according to the activities that we do. The challenge that the organizations need to overcome as well is how not to be risk adverse, and therefore risk management in terms define well the risk appetite that you have with the partner. Identify the risk controls, but together with the partner is critically important. Otherwise, it's a very top-down. So individuals in any activity that we do have to own the risk, share the risk, and show also interest to manage the risk.
No, thank you very much. Smruti, I'm afraid we've got no more time left. It's been is it going to be very short?
I'm just saying, please not only focus on risk, focus on the opportunities when you take risk. Because all the time focusing on risk doesn't give you the opportunities of taking the risk and it will multiply, right? And I think you were talking about the multiplier effect. By taking the risk, you will be able to do more, right? So think about the opportunity as well.
Yeah. And I think that also brings us a little bit back to the point about trust and how important trust is. How there may also need to be a bit of a mindset shift around trust. It reminds me of this saying, trust arrives on foot and it leaves on horseback. But maybe we need to adjust that and say trust arrives by bicycle, let's say. Just be more open to the partners and local partners. Listen, thank you very much to all of our panelists. I hope you have appreciated. I certainly found it a robust discussion and lots of concrete ideas, best practices shared, mindset shifts, behavioral change, attitudes towards local partners is certainly something that came back a lot. On a very practical level, senior people among you, in fact, all along the chain, prioritizing meeting and learning from local organizations more that needs to happen. And there's certainly, a lot of will to change and improve things. And where there's a will, there is usually a way. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much, everyone. There is a coffee break at the moment, going on right now. And don't forget, you can also go upstairs, so you don't just have to spend time queuing up in the room right out here. You can go upstairs outside the museum cafe. Thank you very much, everybody.